What's up, everybody? One Fun Guy Podcast, hanging out in the studio tonight, waiting for Kelly to come on. Tonight's just going to be a low-key night, guys, just rocking out to some Sentenced. If you guys never heard the band Sentenced before, they are awesome. I believe they are from Finland, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, Sentenced is a great band. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's called The Funeral Album. It's one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. It's just awesome. They're such a great band, and I miss them. But anyways, I'm just kind of hanging out and seeing what's going on. Let's see who's on. I don't know. What's up?
Hello. Hi.
What's going on?
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. What you up to?
I'm doing a podcast. I have my buddy coming on in a little bit, so I'm just hanging out, getting my group ready to go, about to share the live. My friend Lay just came on, so she's hanging out. What's up? So
what do
not
you
much,
talk
just
about?
chilling out.
So what did you talk about on your podcast?
Tonight's podcast is going to be about like hard rock and heavy metal music. Me and my buddy Kelly focus on that, but he joins me on Thursday nights. But my normal podcast, the One Fun Guy podcast, is a conversation style podcast. So I would have a conversation like I'm having with you right now. Just tell me where you're from, what you're about, what you got going on, what you're interested in, what you do, if you want me to promote anything. And I just kind of carry on a conversation like that. So it's pretty awesome. So.
Oh, okay, good. Good.
So yeah, so it's nothing too intense, but I just try to have a nice conversation with people and see what's going on and go from there. So that's really it. So
Nothing wrong with that. I try to do the same also.
yeah, how do you go live often, or do you kind of?
Um, I'm trying. I'm
All right.
trying.
Well, first off, do I follow you? I follow you. We're friends.
Yeah,
So I saw in your bio that you're a YouTube creator.
I am.
So that's awesome, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. Don't be ashamed. What we'll do is I think what we should do is maybe we'll plan a day. Maybe we'll go live together. We'll talk about creating YouTube communities, content, how you make it, what you want to do, where you see yourself, what you want to have happen.
Right.
I would love to be a podcaster full time. That would be like the most ideal thing in the world, right? Where I could just have 100,000 YouTube subscribers and YouTube pays me to do podcast and content.
Yeah.
That's my ultimate goal. That's what I would love to have happen. Obviously, it's hard work. I have about 400 YouTube subscribers, so I need to get to 1,000
Let
to
me
get
see.
to monetizing it. But Amy, what's up? So if you guys are on, say hi, introduce yourselves, hang out tonight, guys. I haven't shared the show yet, so I'm just trying to find out who is on. I'm going to do my best to share it out to as many people as I can here.
Let me see how many I have. I don't think I have that much, but
Yeah, I just hit 400. So for me, it's been
wow.
kind of a unique experience because I've been trying to really get my algorithm up and get everything that I can boosted, right? So so my goal is to basically do that, as much as I can. Giuseppe, what's up? Say
I
hi,
just
guys.
have.
If you hop in, follow me. So, all right, do me a favor.
I
Subscribe to
have
my channel, and then when I
8.
get done with this, I'll subscribe to yours.
Okay. The Okay, let me put it in here. What's your YouTube name?
One Fun Guy Podcast.
One.
Yeah. So it pops up with the same logo that I have here.
You said what is it again?
One Fun Guy Podcast. So I'm the same across all the platforms.
Okay.
And my logo's a little arrow with OFG in it. You'll
Okay.
see it on YouTube. So
Yes, honey. I'm sorry. I'm also a nurse too.
No, no worries. That's awesome, right? That's being a fellow first responder, so I like it.
You're gonna have to inbox it to me.
Yeah, I'll inbox you. Like I said, maybe we'll plan a date in the next couple days to go live, and we'll see kind of what happens, and maybe
Okay.
we can do this again, and we'll chat, and we'll talk about your YouTube community and everything you got going on, and everything that you want to have happen. Guys,
Mhm.
if you follow me, follow Justice World. I just met her tonight. We're on for the first time. So I know my buddy Kelly's going to be on. He's going
Hey,
to
everybody.
be in. But if you guys like me and you like the live, follow her. We're going to plan to do this together. So
Hold on,
we're going
guys.
to, kind of see what's going on. And Mel, what's going on? So we'll continue this again, right? We'll
Okay.
do it again, and we'll have a time where we can talk and get to know each other and go from there. Thank you for what you do, by the way, right? Nurses are one of the most underappreciated jobs. So, thank you for doing that and picking that profession. It's super unappreciated. So guys, I'm just hanging out. I'm waiting for Kelly to get on. I just met Justice World. She came on. She said hi. She asked me to co-host, so I said yes. So this is awesome, right? I love meeting new people. I love networking. I love doing all this stuff. So for me, this was awesome. She's a nurse, so she's got patients and stuff to do. So uh, by this, you have to connect. So let me do this. Kelly, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, bud. When Justice comes back, I'm gonna say goodbye to her, and then I'm gonna get Kelly on, and we're gonna do the podcast. But I want to make sure that we get on. Nick, what's up, buddy? Hope all is well. But yeah, we're just kind of hanging out tonight, guys. We're me and Kelly. We talk hard rock and heavy metal, so we're doing this as a weekly thing with us. Hold on a second. I'm just messaging a friend here. Just started the academy. Well, best of luck to you, my friend. I wish you all the best. You're gonna rock it over there. I know it. You're gonna do great. Just learn from your mistakes. Try not to make them again, and just fail when you win. Right? We all make mistakes. We all do kind of things. Just learn from them. Try not to make them again, and it's the best advice I can give you. Don't worry about failing. We all do it. So Mel, take care. I promise we will do a live together as well. So I didn't forget about you, Mel. We'll definitely do that for sure, hands down. I've been kind of busy lately getting everything squared away, but I did not forget about you. I promise that. So we'll definitely do that. So let me see here. Kelly, do me a favor and request it again. Um, I'm gonna. My buddy's gonna get on. I don't know if you heard me before, but I said thank you for doing what you do. Being a
Oh, you're
nurse is one
welcome.
of the most underappreciated professions. So thank you for that. It's awesome. You picked a great profession to get into.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's do this. Let's stay in touch. I will
Okay.
message you after the show, obviously. I don't know if I can do it now. Let me see if I can send you a message here. I think because I'm live with you, I don't know if I can or not. But
Okay, that's fine. Just
but
take your
I'm
time. No
definitely
rush.
going to. I promise. And
Okay.
we'll definitely plan something for the future. We'll definitely get together.
Okay.
All right.
That'll be good.
Awesome.
Thank
All right. Well,
you.
you have a good night. Stay safe out there, and
You
make sure you
too.
get some rest. All right.
I will.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
All right. Kelly, if you're on,
Oh, I don't know how to.
hold on. You know what? I'm going to ask him to just request me to get back on, and then I'll disconnect
Oh,
with you. So,
okay.
Kelly, if you can send me a message to get back on.
Let me see.
Guys, if you're new here, follow me and I'll follow you back. Follow Justice too. I just met her, but she's super cool, and we're gonna plan another live to get together and do that. I'm trying to just find out. Oh, perfect. So, guys, that's what this app is about, right? As much as I complain about it and I'm bad, that's kind of what this does, right? So it allows you to network, and it allows you to meet new people. And I can't spell tonight, but I'm gonna get Kelly back on. I'm gonna invite him to come on, hopefully. Just accept. Hey, bud, what's going on?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good. I just met a new friend. I hopped on and I was talking about my podcast and it popped up. I'm like, I'll take a chance. You never know what you're going to get, right? Sometimes you get some really crazy people and sometimes you get some somewhat normal people. And lucky that was a normal one. So,
Well, yeah, there's something to be said about everybody, though.
yeah, I went live and I was rocking out to Sentenced. I don't know if you heard it, but I was listening
No,
to the Funeral album.
really? Well,
Yeah, it's
that's cool.
one of my favorite albums of all time. I don't know if you've ever heard of the band Sentenced, but
I've heard of them, but I don't know them very well.
yeah, they're pretty good. But yeah, I don't know. We didn't have a
All right.
topic for tonight, so
I don't. I don't
I
know
know you
either.
always ponder these questions about metal and music and movies and intertwining. What do you got for us?
Yeah.
Give us a question.
Well, the most popular question that I've asked lately was about metal bands from Sweden, and just
Okay.
as a sort of a passing note, when I was asking what your favorite band is from Sweden, I just said, I wonder why that is, type
Right.
of thing. Um, but it's a pretty interesting topic, right? Because you can think of a number of things like, oh, is it because of the cold, dark winters? Well, no, not really, because there are lots of American bands. Florida isn't exactly cold, dark winters or whatever either, and
Right.
you know. But it seems like consensus answer here, and it's very un-American in a way, because it's if you want to start a band, you can go to this organization that is funded by the government. They have facilities, rehearsal rooms. They have
Sure.
instruments, so you don't even have to rent or buy an instrument. So they have them in these rehearsal facilities. So you can just start. And then it's basically like a study circle type of thing that is also
Okay.
like, as in anything else. Like if you were to study math or do any sort of other type of study
Mhm.
circle or whatever, right? Then the government sort of funds you, so you can slowly
Sure.
build up, like so you can afford strings and whatever
Yeah.
else. And so that part of culture has been supported, meaning that if you want to start a band, even if you don't have the money,
Right.
um, then you can. Which is the U.S. doesn't function that way at all,
No,
right?
not at all.
But but that was an interesting thing. But apart from that, there are other hubs on the planet, right?
Yeah.
That
A lot, ironically enough, the U.S. almost wants you to fail, right? It
yeah,
seems
well,
like they
want to
want you to not do
weed
that.
them out at least. Like,
Right?
do you
Doesn't it
really
feel
want
that
to?
way?
If you really want to, then yeah, if you sell everything you've got and you're willing to live in a car, then sure, or whatever, right? I don't know. I'm exaggerating, but
Yeah, it
see what I mean.
feels weird that most American bands will never be successful in the terms of like successful. It seems like they try, they fail, and then they basically can't really, do what they want to do, right? And it seems like you have other bands from Europe. They're not uber successful, but like they catch on quicker. They're promoted better. Their fans seem to be more into them, right? Now, obviously, you can attest to that growing up there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, getting started, if you want to start a band and you don't have the equipment or whatever, it only takes you so far, right? But what is it that makes it that, certain areas produce high quality stuff? So you don't not only get started, but you get really good at it, like the songcraft, the musicianship,
Yeah.
the performance skills and all that stuff. That's not something that you get from um, being supplied a rehearsal space, right? So there are other things rather than just given the means to get started that makes certain areas really successful in these things, right? I'm talking Bay Area too, for example, right? Or
Yeah.
the Florida scene,
Right.
or Chile. That
Sure.
Chile is a long country, but I mean, the population is pretty concentrated around the capital there and stuff, right? So, um, or Japan is blowing up, whatever, right? So yeah, it's curious to think about, like, what is it that certain
Right.
areas have that others don't,
Sure.
to produce it. Is it a competitive spirit? Is it a
Do you think it's the
camaraderie?
people that live
Is it
there? Because you would think that Chicago would have a huge scene, but we really don't. We haven't had many hard rock or heavy metal bands that like are like globally famous. I think Disturbed
massive? Yeah,
might be the only one that I mean, you had Flesh Grind back in the day, right? They were kind of local and then got kind of national coverage, and then they went international when they were playing the Metal Fest and stuff like that. I know they went to Germany and they played in Sweden, they played in Denmark and Norway. But like when you think of like a global band from Chicago, Disturbed's the only one that comes to mind. I mean, besides minus like, Cheap Trick and like bands from the 70s and, like that. But like, as far as like heavy metal goes, like hard, like a metal band from Chicago, other than the local ones, most of them just kind of stay in the area, right? All the bands want to play here, right? The scene is big, but bands that start here, there aren't that many.
right. No, I I mean, their Ministry would be pretty big, right? But and Smashing Pumpkins aren't exactly metal, I guess.
Right. I mean,
There's
like, so you had like Trent Reznor's local, right? Like Nine Inch Nails, like he grew up in Barrington, right? In Schaumburg, and he has ties to the Chicagoland area. But as soon as he got the chance to move to LA, he did, right?
right.
So
Yeah,
he's from Chicago, but he doesn't claim this to be like, Billy Corgan still lives here. Pearl Jam, they were Seattle, but Eddie Vedder kind of gravitated towards Chicago. He lives in Lincoln Park now, but they're not from Chicago, right? Like you don't
right.
say Pearl Jam's from Chicago. You have one of the members that lives here, and the other four still live in Seattle. So it's not like just because one guy lives here doesn't mean they're from here, right?
Yeah,
Um, the Smashing Pumpkins are somewhat local, like you said, but even in terms of like it being, a Chicago-based band, three of the guys are from Chicago, the other three are from California. So
yeah,
it's not, like they're born and bred here, right? And
yeah.
and
That's
even,
true.
and even like Al Jorgensen, like, I love Ministry, but they adopted Chicago as their home, right? Like they're, they're not from here. They just made their music here and they studioed here and they played here.
Yeah.
So it's like, but like, when you look at like the main bands, right? You mentioned the Florida scene, obviously California, you moved to Hollywood to make it, right? So that's where Sony is, and RMI and EMI and RPI, all these big record labels that are conglomerates that, I mean, that's where you need to go, right? You have to go to Hollywood to make it. You're not going to stay in Chicago or anywhere else in the country, now to make it, right? It's still California. That's where you go. It's like kind of, and there are great studios in Chicago. I'm not knocking the ones that are here, but that's, I think, why bands that are here just kind of stay globally local, right? They don't ever really kind of grow that as they should.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can think of Macabre and Trouble as being oldish too, right? From down at
right.
in Aurora, I guess. So
and I think
but
some point, I think like DRI claimed Chicago, right? Like for a little bit, they said they were a Chicago band, but I think that's just because they moved here and they started recording here and they kind of started their touring from here. But I mean, they're not a Chicago band by any stretch of the imagination. They claim it, right? Which is totally awesome. DRI is great. I love the fact that they do that.
Yeah. I don't know, and I haven't dug into it very much, but I don't feel like there's an obvious area in the US right now that is considered like that's a metal mecca, if you want to.
I mean, if I had to pick one, honestly, if I didn't say California or the obvious Florida, there's a lot of bands from New York, but I would have to say Ohio is probably the one area. I mean, you look at all the great bands that have come from Cleveland, right? And I'm not talking about just Mushroom Head but like Chimera, Shadows Fall, right? Like a lot of them claimed Ohio as kind of their, own area, right? New Jersey back in the day was like the hardcore scene, right? Look at that.
Hey.
Sunshine. it's like thunder and lightning
here now, isn't it?
Ellie, you're epic. Thank you so much for doing that. I always say that we appreciate all the love and support, but thank you for doing that. But
yeah, no, I do a lot
like I said, I don't know, like, right? Because Hatebreed and that kind of New Jersey hardcore scene was really big in the 90s and 2000s, right? Kill Switch and Hatebreed and Shadows Fall and all those other bands that were kind of claim that area, right? But now, I don't know, right? Who would be Vegas? Maybe, right? Vegas has got some stars coming out of it. A lot of the bigger bands, are playing there more and living there. Obviously they're not from there, but that scene is kind of growing, right? I'm
doing lives every once in a while, right? With listening to bands that are unrecognized or whatever, and it seems like there's a lot of stuff happening in like the Carolinas and Georgia.
I could see that.
So there's stuff happening, but it doesn't feel like there's an American hub now where it's like, like for country, you go to Nashville or whatever, sure. Right? Or, it doesn't seem like there's like, oh shit, I gotta get to Florida because that's.
Well, what about Texas, right? Because you have
Chuck wasn't he from Ohio to start and just moved down there? Chuck Schuldiner of Death. I think
he might have been. Yeah, because
he moved down to Florida and that's where he made it. So.
But I mean, like Texas, right? You got Kubla Khan, Spirit Box. A lot of the bands are Texas is becoming like a hardcore scene again. I know Upon a Burning Body's from Texas. So maybe Texas is kind of the scene. The South definitely seems to have the better movement, though, for sure.
Yeah, it seems
right
like it.
For whatever reason, right? And you would think that the North would be kind of because obviously you had the New York punk scene, right? CBGBs and all that, and then you had the LA punk scene, which were two totally different sounds, but like still kind of cool. But like you had the Misfits from Jersey and the Ramones from New York, and so it's a little bit I think that stems from the roots there. But I mean, like as far as people moving, right now you have a lot of people leaving California, going to other places, so it's kind of nice to see, right, a lot of the LA bands now are moving around the area, right? They're not staying in LA anymore. They're moving to Tennessee, they're moving to Alabama, they're moving, to Florida, they're moving to Texas, right? So at least they're kind of getting out of that environment, which is nice. I mean, but like, like we were saying before, California is the hub, right? So in terms of like metal music, like that, if you want to make it big, you still go to Hollywood, right? That's kind of the dream, right? To go to LA and make it. But
Yeah,
as we talked,
yeah,
earlier
for
though,
sure.
right?
That's true, but
But now you can do it in your backyard, right? You
yeah,
can you can make your own. I mean, look at what's behind you, right? All your instruments. You have a record set up, right? You can
yeah,
make music right to your laptop, right? And now you can
yeah,
distribute it yourself, right? So you could be your own garage band per se, right? And make it
yeah.
big, right? Be somewhat successful,
Which a lot of people do, right?
right?
Yeah, no,
So
it's
yeah,
yeah. The world has shrunk, and then it's play locally, or
yeah,
if there's enough interest, you can go on a mini tour to start, and then
sure,
maybe that blows up. So yeah, but I still think that it's interesting. But in terms of building a scene, a local scene um, where things happen, I think that Chicago, a lot of the metro areas are just so freaking huge that it's
sure,
difficult to get that sort of intimacy. The Chicagoland area has the same population as the entire country of Sweden, right?
right.
Uh, so it is concentrated in a small area, but it's still like 10 million people, and Chicagoland is still like,
Why do
if you have to
you
drive 40 minutes to get to a show, then and it's a local band, then it's still like a yeah, you
Right.
know.
Why do you think that is though, right? Like we talked about that before, right? We mentioned some bands out of Sweden, right? Like you mentioned in Tombs and At the Gates, right? But I mean, look at the monster bands that have come out of there, like Meshuggah and
Mhm.
Opeth and In Flames. Why do you
Yeah,
think that is? Like, why do you think they have such a high concentrate of great bands, not just good bands, but like great bands, right? When you say, give me your top 10 heavy metal bands, right? And I'm not talking about your Metallicas and your Megadeths. I'm talking about like your hardcore heavy metal like bands. Why does Sweden
yeah,
have, 8 of the top slots? Why is that?
yeah.
They got to
It's
be doing
yeah,
something right. I mean, they can't
it's
be any more talented than anybody else in the world, but their sounds are phenomenal. Like, like I said, between, the early 90s to now, they've been successful and stayed successful. Right? These bands are like at the top. They're top tier. They're not like mid tier. Like US has like mid tier bands, right? A lot of mid tiers. You not everybody's Metallica and Pantera, right? Most of the bands are fall into place. But when you look at Sweden, right, they're all top tier bands. Every
mhm.
single one of them.
Yeah, and
It's
that's what
amazing, right?
that's what I was saying. Like yeah, sure, the facilities are there to get your band started, but how come there's so many of those great and super influential ones, and they've
Sure.
been around for a few decades by now too,
Right.
right? So they keep reinventing themselves and staying interesting. So what's with that creativity? Like where's that coming from?
Yeah, I don't know. That's the most bizarre thing, right? That when you look at it, like, and not only the amount of creativity, but then look at how they've maintained themselves, right? Like, like you said, reinventing yourselves, keep writing great songs, keep writing great music, like decade after decade after decade. Like they are on point still, right? In Flames just put out an album, I think in 2021. It was awesome. They didn't lose a beat.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's true. Was that the tour when I went to see them? I saw them in, wasn't it 22, 23? Anyway, um, yeah, that was Meshuggah in Flames touring together.
Yeah, right. I mean, how
Some
awesome,
year.
right? That
Yeah. Um, yeah, maybe it goes back to society a little bit too, right? I mean, I know
maybe.
that a lot of members live abroad or whatever. Like At the Gates. I think the singer actually lives in Holland and the drummer lives in
Sure,
London,
sure.
UK, or whatever, right? Um, but there's still a Swedish band, and when they rehearse or whatever, they still go to Gothenburg and do their thing. And it might just be that because it has that societal support or whatever,
Nicole,
like
thank you so much.
or the jealousy isn't there, like it's friendly competition maybe more
Sure.
than anything, so
Yeah.
it's like there's not the stress of, oh, how the hell am I going to to pay my next, you know, my next rent or my mortgage or
Right.
whatever, right? That whole thing is kind of sort of taken care of. You don't have to worry about that. You can focus on just creating your art because you're pretty set, you know,
Yeah.
like you have a safety net, you have a, you know, all that things going for you, so you can actually not worry about a million different things and just sort of,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to build a studio. It's like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's a good cultural thing. And Sweden is a small country. We need to be seen outside on the planet. Thank you so much for all the ice creams and stuff. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
All the gifts, guys. You guys are amazing. Really. It's
um,
awesome that you guys are doing this for us.
yeah, so
Um,
I just, maybe it's just having that feeling of being supported and that experimentation is encouraged as opposed to, you know, I need to release another album like my last one that was the most successful we ever did because I need to maintain that sort of level of fame or whatever in order to be able to pay the bills and put food on
yeah.
the table, right?
But I give you, but so,
Maybe.
but creativity wise, right? Like, so you take a band like, let's say, um, Amon Amarth, right?
Hmm.
They started off as Viking metal, then they went to death metal, then they went back to more of the eclectic metal. Then they started doing like the monster metal, right? Like they were doing the over the top type of stuff, right? Like, and then you have bands like Hammerfall that have kind of navigated the power metal scene for a very long time. Two totally different style of bands, right? Like one is an basically an opera rock band that's powerful, and the other one is like one of the most hardcore death metal bands you can get. But yet they share the same platform, right? The same countrymen, the same journey, the same stages. It's just so odd that like they longevity wise can do this, right? And you know, and then I look at a band like a newer band that's mid 2000s, right? Is Sabaton, right? They just kind of take off where everybody else left. Like, how is that possible, right? They're just so great at what they
Yeah.
do. But it's like all of these bands, three different styles of music, could all share the same stage. Whereas, like in the US, you don't see that very often, right? Like you all, it's a death metal tour, it's a core tour, it's a a black metal tour, right? You don't ever see like Cradle of Filth play with like Hypocrisy and then play with like a regular like rock band, right? When you do that, right, in your grand scheme of things, right, when you look at it from the level of capacity that you play, right? Like, why do those bands open the door to that, and why do our bands kind of enclose themselves in? Like they feel that they can't take other bands with that style on that tour anymore.
Maybe you just answered the last question with this question. You know, how can they maintain the creativity? Well, because they expose themselves. The
Right?
Swedes
Maybe
might
that's it,
expose
right?
themselves to more than just their little corner of the scene, right? Um, like inspiration wise, you know, like there are some American bands that are doing that stuff too, right? You know, like but it also at the same time feel like they're taking that
You
inspiration
know,
from, we want to do what Opeth does. We want to be,
yeah,
have more of the symphonic elements and incorporate that. Hey, that's a good idea. We'll use that too. Uh, Sweden, though, you know, when you look at the entire music world, has produced so fucking much too. Like, you know, not just metal, but obviously Max Martin is a huge producer that did all the Katy Perry's and all the Backstreet Boys
right.
and you know, I don't know how many, how many Adele and you know all that
Yeah.
shit. Huge, right? Um, and all the one-hit wonders like Eagle Eye Cherry or Roxette or Robin or you know there's a whole slew of bands that have come out of Sweden, not just metal. So there's something in the water in terms of feeding that creativity and having the drive to be as good and as different as possible, I think.
Yeah, and like you see some American bands try to do that, right? I like Avenged Sevenfold comes to mind, right? Where they mix a lot of music together, like the hardcore, the heavy metal, the stuff, right? But most of our bands focus on one style of music and they stick with that style of music, right? They don't try to trend off. Another band that does it, just because I think the musicians that he's had some very good ones, but like Marilyn Manson, right? Like he can go from like a punk to a rock to a metal to like but his musicians are very good, right? But when you look at an American band, right, it's kind of like one style. It worked for them. They stick with it. They never change. They never deviate from that. The plan is let's keep making more hardcore albums. Let's keep, because that's what our fans want. Do you think it's because we're just used to that because we have so many bands? Or do you think it's just our narrow mindedness?
Uh, I'll go back to that fear. Like once you find success here, I think that the risk taking of potentially losing that by doing something different is overwhelming. It is so hard to become successful, even to get to a mid tier is so difficult.
Right.
And once you get there, you want to hold on to it. So what was it that worked that got you there? So I think that there's a bit of a fear there, that,
Yeah.
okay, so this worked. So this is what we'll do.
Right.
And the risk taking of trying something different is not as common, but I think that's that fear base, like, ooh, I found my fame formula. Now I'm gonna stick to that. So I guess on a fundamental level there, that means that it's more fame driven than creativity driven. As in, I create my music, we create our music, and we put it out there, and we hope that people like it. And if they do, great. If they don't, well, we're pleased with our creativity, right? Whereas some bands are like, okay, I'm gonna try a few things to see what it is that the audience likes, and then when you find that,
Yeah.
then you want to maintain that fame, and it's not necessarily the creativity that got you there, that that people that the bands think is what got them that fame, right?
Now, do you think fans that have a more eclectic mind to music will be more open to band changing their style? Like, obviously, you grew up with like a more punk background. I grew up with more of the 80s hair metal band background, right? But we found like heavy metal is kind of like our core, right? Like, I was introduced to the glam metal way before I was introduced to the, heavy hardcore death metal, right? Which I love till this day. But I was introduced to music from my parents with oldies, right? 60s and 70s rock basically is what
Yes.
got me into it, right? So I was late to the punk scene, but I was very early to the glam metal scene, right? My cousin got me into that. We were into Slaughter and Winger and, all those bands before I got introduced to Pantera and Metallica and Megadeth, right? Like I knew who they were, but that was later on. The bands I was listening to were all the 80s glam metal bands with a lot of the 50s and 60s rock mixed in, right? I grew up listening to 104.3 in the Chicagoland area, which was Dick Biondi, right? So it was all the, Detroit style, rock and roll, right? It was the doo-wop. It was the, Richie Valenses and the Big Bopper and the Buddy Hollies and stuff like that, right? So that's what got me started. My mom would listen to that every day driving to work, right? She dropped me off at school. And so for the 20 minutes or 15 minutes I was with her, that's what was on the radio. And all those songs kept replaying and replaying and replaying. So that's what I was used to. And then when I heard glam, and I know you were, introduced to that too, and you got more into the punk scene. But I think like me and you have that open-mindedness where if a band that tries something different and it's not too far away from what they're doing, right? Like you can get into it. Where I think a lot of fans are like, listen, you put out 4 albums, sounds the exact same. Now you put this one out and you want to experiment. Why would you do that? Like, why would you deviate? Right? And it's like we don't give them a chance to explain themselves, to say, well, we've grown artistically, or we like new things, or we've met some people along the way, right? And they've introduced us to some stuff. We're just very narrow-minded when it comes to music in this country, right? It's like, do not change for anything. Stay the course and don't deviate.
And I think one thing too is that, obviously now you can get music from anywhere, at any time.
Right.
But when all of these bands, Meshuggah and Opeth and At the Gates and all those bands, when they all got started, that wasn't true. If anything, it
Right.
was like from getting cassette tapes, right? I've talked
Sure.
about this before.
Yeah.
But in the US, because we had like 3 radio stations in the country of Sweden. That's it. We had
Right.
2 TV channels. That was it. So whatever we consumed was something that we had to seek out, and it wasn't that much, to be honest, right? So it automatically became that you were listening to punk rock, and you were listening
Right.
to 70s, and you were listening to all these things. And if you're a creative person, then it one way or another makes its way to your art. While in the US, when you have 80 radio stations in the Chicago area, and at any given moment, if you like extreme slam gore death or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's probably 60 bands to choose from there, so you can stay in that lane
Sure.
very comfortably with a multitude of bands. And that was not really how it was in Sweden in the beginning, at least. So maybe it's
Right.
that spirit that's sort of carried on, that it's like, yeah, no, let's try something different because we like it, for no other reason that we like it and want to try some of that. I mean, what Meshuggah said when they went away from sounding like Metallica to doing their crazy shit, that was when they got into fusion jazz, right? So that was the thing.
Yeah.
They want to do jazz fusion, but they like to play metal. So, so they experimented, and this is what they came up with. And obviously it's been pretty
Right. It's worked for them, right? 'Cause
successful, right?
they've been incredible for so very long.
And we can look at In Flames, right? That have changed styles so dramatically over the years, right? But they're saying now too, like I read some interview with them. It's like there's no other explanation that would change styles because it's what we wanted to do.
Yeah. And the
that's
cool
just
thing
what we
about,
felt like doing.
and I will say this, right? I know a lot of people give credit to Rammstein for their over the top kind of, theatrics and their stage presence and the flames and the stuff. But In Flames was doing great engineering with their stages long before Rammstein was ever in the picture. And they don't truly get the credit they deserve, right? I remember In Flames, even back in the early 90s, right? When they started putting the screens up and they actually had to display, right? And they started connecting TVs together, right? And doing different, like, they were very ahead of their times when it came to stage presence and how they put on a show and what they did, right? They were like Iron Maiden +1 at that time, right? Now it seems like it's the norm. Everybody does that, right? TV screens, monitors, flashes, lasers, lights, right? But they were doing that in the death metal scene and in the metal scene long before a lot of these other bands. And I just feel they don't get the credit they deserve from an engineering standpoint, right? Of how they set up their stage and how they, played their instruments and how they used platforms and risers. And, they were doing that long before a lot of these other bands would ever consider doing that.
Yeah, and that actually comes from pretty much every metal kid in
Mhm.
again with the old folks. They loved Kiss and they
Kiss,
loved Iron Maiden. So that was like, if we can be like Kiss and Iron Maiden, holy shit. So it was a lot of it was trying to be like Kiss, I think, with all the pyrotechnics and shit. It was like, everybody wanted to Kiss on some level. Maybe some didn't, but I would say that pretty much every metal kid back then was a Kiss lover.
Yeah,
So,
of course, right? And,
so
and
a lot comes from, a lot of credit goes to Kiss for that. I think.
I just that's the one thing I really feel about In Flames, right? Like, because I love their music, I love the way that but like from an engineering standpoint, they were always on point, right? They were just incredible from the get-go, and they always had a fantastic stage setup, and they just did it right. And it's so weird to see these bands now that, like, Rammstein gets a ton of credit for doing the over the top pyro, and In Flames was doing that long before Rammstein
Right.
was doing that. They just don't get the credit they deserve. And I hope that one day people recognize their true talents. Like when you look at the older Wacken videos, right, from 92, 93, 94, and In Flames has these incredible stage setups with the pyros and the flames long before Rammstein was ever in the picture. they just don't get the credit that they truly deserve from an engineering standpoint. In Flames was awesome, and they always have been.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that also comes from a little bit of the Swedish mentality here too. Like we like to be critical. I mean, I said,
Mhm.
we're open-minded and
Sure.
open things up or whatever, right? And try things out. And if it doesn't work,
Right.
it doesn't work. But it's we're still pretty good at pointing at things and saying, well, that wasn't very good, was it? Like so it's like for that to work with. They were probably mostly in Sweden. Well, obviously they'd start to branch out and went down into Europe and stuff, right? But still on home turf, there could be a whole lot of people that if they
Yeah.
couldn't pull it off, then they would hear about it. It's like, man, that was lame. Like
Right.
that was what I put in some little signal lights on stage. What's going
Yeah.
on? Like so.
Yeah, so like TSO, right? Like they're in a league of their own, right? But they specialize in winter touring, right? TSO has that sweet spot from basically Halloween, right, to like pretty much November 1st to like January like 5th, right? You have a massive amount of Christmas music being played in such a short time. So they can afford to do that because they're not doing it year round. The TSO squeezes in a, a bunch of rock and metal into 3 months, right? There's no way that they would be able to do that if they did it in the winter, spring, summer, and fall, right? TSO is a very eclectic group. They basically play, like I said, from November 1st to like January 5th or whatever. Once that hits, they're done. You won't see TSO in July or June or April or May, right? They play a solid maybe 10 weeks throughout the year, right? And that allows them to do that, right? Another one, if you ever watch their tour schedule, is Tool, right? They don't play back to back to back cities. There's no way they could set up their stage and their show. They play once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. They're very spanned because they need time to set it, take it all down, haul it, travel with it, and then set it all up again. So bands that have minimal stage setups can play 3 shows in a week or 4 shows in a week, right? It's just their equipment. They just break it down and they move. But when you set up a stage like TSO does, or like Tool or Rammstein, for example, right? They're not playing back to back cities, right? They're playing once every 5 or 6 days or 7 days so they can get it all done, right? So
Yeah.
they're unique groups of people, right? Most of the mid-range bands want to play the amount of shows that they can in a certain amount of time because they want to make the money to put back into it, right? They need to make more merchandise, they need to press more records, they need to put, people in the seats to do it. So their attitude is let's give them the best show we can, but they might have a banner or they might have maybe a TV screen or something like that. You're not getting those massive stage shows in a mid-range band. They just can't afford it, number one. And then number two, they wouldn't want to do that, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, some
So,
bands that can afford it can actually have 2 setups. So it's like, while we're playing one stage, they're setting up
right.
at the next place. I think the record is Melvin's. I think they actually managed to play 50 states in 50 days. So
Yeah.
every day they played a new state, which is kind of, that's, but they
You
could
know,
also be 3 people, but
yeah.
if they played a bookstore,
And that's the thing about the Melvins, right? Like they don't need a setup. Their music speaks for themselves,
yeah,
right? If you've ever
yeah,
seen the Melvins live or any variation of guys in the band, right? They are just incredible musicians. They let the music do the talking for them. They don't need a stage show. All they need is a dim light and some smoke, and they are good to go, right? The Melvins are awesome when it comes to
yeah.
that, right? They have that like perfect, that they sound great, their quality is on point, and they're one of the bands that when they play live, it sounds like they're in the studio. You can't tell the difference. There's no feedback. There's no just they figured it out. Like they are perfect. They are a perfect live band.
I have never, despite them being one of my favorite bands, I have never seen them live, but I'm going to in May, and I know I've said it many times.
Nice.
I'm
Good
so
for you.
excited about it.
Yeah.
And they're playing with Napalm Death too, which is
Yes.
one of those like, oh, I didn't see them in '88. I should have seen them in
Right.
'88. But yeah, so that's yeah. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and some people can get away with that, and that's also maybe like Ramstein are cool. Like I don't mind when people put them on or whatever, right? But is it something I put on myself? No, not really, because I still have a little bit of that
Yeah.
mainstreamy disdain. It's like they don't feel like my band so much. But I also think that maybe because of that stage show, they feel a little bit gimmicky because I'm used to seeing bands
Maybe, right.
with their sweaty t-shirts.
You
Like
know, and that's the thing, right? Like Rammstein figured it out, right? They they have had the same members now for 30 years. They musically are on point. Their stage setup is on point, right? Like they were one of the bands that figured it out. They figured out what to do. They figured out how to do it, and they sold themselves very well. And I don't knock Rammstein at all, right? But musically, they're great, right? They sound. If Rammstein didn't have the pyro, people would still go and see Rammstein. It's like the added bonus to their show, right? They're just very good musicians, and they've been playing together forever. They sound fantastic. They always, but they are one of those bands that could afford to pay an entire crew of people to go out there and help them sound great, right? They have
yeah,
people setting up their instruments for them. They have people sound checking for them. All they do is go on stage and play their instruments and sing. They're not spending the time sound checking their own stuff. They have a team of people that do that for them. So they've made it, right? Like Rammstein is
yeah,
a very big band, and they can do that. So they can save their energy for the show. They're not putting in a 3 or 4 hour sound check before they go live for 2 hours that night. They have a team of people that do that for them.
yeah. But Germany is yet another one of those hubs
Sure.
that where we started, right? Like there were definitely like pockets on the planet where things popped up that
Sure.
became hubs, and Germany. So Ramstein, I think, sort of managed to connect two historically important things, which was obviously Kraftwerk were from there that actually
Mhm.
made sort of avant-garde type
Right.
synthetic music palatable. Um, and obviously they had huge metal bands in the 80s and 70s and stuff, right?
Hmm.
They had all the Scorpions and
Yeah.
Michael Schenker and all that type of things, and not to mention that the Creator and
Yeah.
Sodom and a lot of early extreme metal bands sort of popped up from there, which I
Right.
also think comes a lot from friendly competition, right?
Hmm.
So Ramstein managed to sort of revive the German scene, I think, when they came out and actually came up with industrial that didn't age, if
Yeah.
you will, right? If you listen to Ministry of Mind is a Terrible Thing, right? It doesn't sound that hard anymore. Well, it does, right?
Right.
But if you would play it to a kid now and say that this is industrial, and they would go like, "What is
Right.
no one
Yeah.
to me
Exactly.
on
Right.
that track
Yeah.
or whatever?" Right?
Right.
What are those weak ass guitars
Yeah.
doing? Um, but Ramstein, managed to figure out that sort of that timeless, heavy, ABBA-like industrial, if you will, right?
Yeah. They just, they just did it right, and like I
Yeah,
said, love them or
they
hate
know
them,
what buttons to push. They know exactly how to do it.
right. They
And
figured
it's
it out. They're one of the few bands that are still around today that have had the longevity and can still go and sell out an entire show and everybody wants to see them. They figured it out, right? They
yeah,
just
yeah,
did it right. They were very good at what they did musically and visually. They mastered it. They're
yeah,
top notch.
yeah.
The
Germany, I think, is easier to analyze why it went so well there because it's such a congested place.
Mhm.
It's very small. It doesn't take very long to go from the north to the south there or whatever, right? So and they speak the same language too, right?
Yeah,
They're
sure.
not English. They don't
Right.
they don't speak Polish as the next door neighbors or
Yeah,
French or Dutch or any of that, right? So they had their sort of pocket where they could have their own community inside there,
sure.
and then obviously
Absolutely.
got discovered, um, which is what I think just sort of in some weird way happened in Florida or the Bay Area was that there was a pocket with enough people that were near each other, close enough to each other, good
Yeah.
enough on their instruments, and creative enough to have that sort of creative competition a little bit to push each other and see how good can we make this, and how can we push this further, and or what can we do that's unexpected, to beat the other bands.
Right.
So everybody wanted to go see every band every time they played, because like, what are they going to do now? So
and that's why, again, too, I know we mentioned it before, and I know you bring them up all the time, but like, look at what like Caius was doing, right? Like, you had all those bands that started off Fu Manchu all playing in the desert together as friends, right? It wasn't a competition. It was, hey, we're playing, come with us, right? And they'd all switch bands with each other. They'd all play together, right? And I think that's why the Seattle scene is so near and dear to people, right? Because it wasn't a competition. It was, hey, I have a band. You should come play with my band. And if you have friends, invite them to come play with us, right? So all these bands started like mixing in together and playing together. And then they just said, hey, we're better suited together. Let's do this. And you guys do your thing. But it wasn't like there was any like competition, right? It was like, hey, bring your buddies along for the ride, right? You got two guys that could play. Let them, join in the session. And then they just formed these bands out of there. And it seemed like they all naturally got along, right? They were all friends. They were all on each other's albums. They all played together, where it's like, you don't really see that, because it wasn't more of a competition as much as it was hey, let's do this together. The more people we have, the more notoriety we can get, right? Now, obviously, some of the bands were better than other bands, right? When you look at like Soundgarden, for example, right? And you look at like, and you look at like Mother Love Bone, right? But a lot of these bands formed out of other bands who had musicians pass away, right? Guys that OD'd or were caught into the drug scene, right? Pearl Jam formed out of Mother Love Bone. If their singer never had passed away, Pearl Jam wouldn't exist.
Right. Yeah, no, that's
so a lot
true.
of that was just, but I think that's why people like that scene so much, because it was friendly. That's why in the desert scene in California, right? People liked that because it wasn't a competition. It was like, hey, let's get 30 musicians together. We'll all play together. People want to come and see us. They can jam with us if they pick up an instrument. And it wasn't a competition. It was like, hey, bring your friends. Let's go hang out, grab some beers and chill.
Yeah. No, I mean it as in sort of creative competition.
Right.
Like you still want to outdo each other to some level, but you're still friends, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like it's still like and I think that's what works. Seattle, I think, has probably the most parallels to what I think that Sweden was like in the like 80s, early 90s type thing, because it was punk rock, it was hardcore, it was metal, it was and everybody played in each other's bands, and eventually something clicked with a bunch of them. They had the same vision, they had enough skill or at least dedication to become good, that it turned into because we could look at how the hell can so many great rock bands come out of Seattle. It's that's also sort of disproportionate. LA makes sense because it's the entertainment capital. Like people move there.
Right.
Fine, people moved to Seattle too, but they had a good thing going on before shit blew up. And like they said, also like pretty much every drummer in all of Seattle at some point played in Nirvana.
Yeah.
They had about half of the bass players too.
Yeah. Right. They all played with each other. Correct.
Yeah. So and Melvin's is another example. It's Dale and Buzz, and then Revolving Door with the rest of them. But and I think that Melvins have kept that up too, because also I watched a documentary about them, and it was like, well, it keeps us fresh. It's me, it's me and Dale.
Right.
But when things start to feel samey, then we gotta change, and it's usually that we change the bass player, or at one point they added a second drummer or whatever, right? Like they just needed to be like, this is not surprising anymore. We're just sort of doing the same thing, and I think that's the most important part. Like, no, if it becomes stagnant, the audience picks up on it.
Right. And the cool thing is that like, I know we talk about the Melvins and they don't truly get the credit they deserve, right? And I only say that because how many people from the hardcore scene to the metal scene to the rock scene to even the jazz scene want to play with these guys, right? They must be cool dudes, right? Because you have like, Dave Lombardo has played in 3 different variations of the Melvins bands that they've all kind of been a part of, right? And he's a hardcore drummer, yet he fits in perfectly. Then you have Mike Patton. You have, and the artists go on and on and on of people that have played with the Melvins. They must be cool dudes, right? To like have all these bands want to be around them and play with them, right? And they, that just shows like how they must be nice guys, right? They have to be.
Yeah, well, I hear both. Like, you know, that Buzzo can be a bit of a guy sometimes, but again, he's passionate. He's passionate about his art and all that stuff, right? So, and he has a vision that he goes with. So sometimes it rubs people the wrong way a little bit. But I think that's also from being a no bullshit type of guy too. But obviously, people get along with him. Otherwise, they wouldn't. You know, like shit. I don't want to be, you know, bass player number 18. You know.
Right,
like,
exactly.
You know, like how many times can you get married and then, you know,
right,
say that, no, you're the one.
Yeah.
But Melvins had that reputation early in the Seattle scene too, that everybody wanted to sound like the Melvins. Listen to the first Nirvana album, you know, the Bleach album. They were trying to sound like Melvins. You know, a lot of it, because Melvins started as a punk band and then they got sludgy and, you know, all the riffiness and stuff. So, which, you know, triggered Mudhoney and, you know, Green River, Mudhoney and all that stuff. And then Alice in Chains, they were hair metal, but decided to get a little more grimy or whatever. So Melvin's influence on that, everything
no
that
doubt.
came out of that city is not to be underestimated at all. They can be difficult to listen to. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it takes an ear, right?
You know, you
got to
get
into them, right?
You know, Alice in Chains or Mudhoney or whatever, right? But,
and that's the thing, right? Like everybody has a different ear for music, and they like what they like, right? So there's some people like myself, like I love Alice in Chains, but there's some people that are like, how can you listen to this, right? Like, and it's just, I think it's just eclectic what you like, right? But I think that in the music world, like the Melvins are super respected, right? Because a lot of people want to play with them. And another band too, that I will say this, right? That a lot of guys seem to just want to play with each other and do music with is Anthrax, right? Like all those guys in Anthrax have had different outlets throughout their career of bands that they played with, but they all seem just like down to earth dudes that like everybody wants to like hang out with them and play with them. It's just cool. Like I said, it must be that they're decent people.
Almost to their detriment, I would say. You know, like they've been a little bit too much fun to some people. Like, okay, so they're just goofy guys in shorts hopping around on stage. He's got this sort of big Indian chief headgear on him and whatever, right? You know, it's like, oh man, they're a joke band. You know, I want some real thrash. But I think that's definitely their charm. For sure.
Yeah,
but it does rub some people the wrong way. And you know, it's difficult to justify Anthrax when you're a Slayer fan type of thing. It was usually one or the other.
Right, you know, but they all played together. That's the thing, right? Like they were all in you know, bands together, and they, you know, Kerry King and Scott Ian did projects together, right? And they've all kind of played, and Jeff Hanneman played with Anthrax for a little bit, right? So they all were like friends, but it just seems like most of the people in that scene wanted to do stuff with Anthrax, which just kind of goes to show to their musicianship and to their character, right? Of their level of like fun, right? Because people wanted to be a part of what they were doing. And it just, to me, that's always been cool. And that's kind of seems to me how the Melvins always were, right? Like people just wanted to be involved with what they were doing and wanted them to play on their albums, wanted to like, so they must be doing something right. That's, you know, it just.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about Caius before, right? But, you know, Josh Homme or Homme, I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is, but he obviously had, you know, after the you know, Caius imploded or whatever, right? And just fooled around with the desert sessions, which was basically, I'm going to play with whatever buddy, you know, Chicago band Dwarves, by the way, you know, so their bass
and the
player,
Dwarves are great,
he's
right?
in Queens of the Stone Age a lot.
Yeah, not many people know the Dwarves, but the Dwarves are awesome, right? If you like are into that kind of hardcore punk ska kind of weird thing, they were very eclectic.
Yeah.
Very good band.
I bought one at the record store.
Yeah.
At Rolling Stone. when we were there the other week. I haven't listened to it yet, though. I have to, but yeah, I love dwarves. I love dwarves.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So and then Queens of the Stone Age happens, but obviously Dave Grohl played drums, and they've had also sort of a revolving door of people, and he had that them Crooked Vultures band with John Paul Jones, and
right. Yeah.
Who else was in that? It was Grohl. John Hom, and John Paul Jones, and I think that they had some extra guitar players here and there that I don't remember.
Yeah, I think
exactly.
they had, because I want to say like I think like Jimmy Page played a song with them, and they had like that kind of, they had the Zeppelin thing going, and they had a bunch of eclectic musicians play with them along the way, which is a very good project. Them Crooked Vultures is really good. That was a big thing. That was kind of, but that's the era,
it was
though.
weird. It was
Like,
also
all of those bands, because they intertwined, because them Crooked Vultures played with the band called the Neurotic Outsiders, which was Matt Sorum and Duff McKagan and the guys from the Sex Pistols, and they were doing punk rock. So it's kind of very weird, because everyone thinks of like Guns N' Roses, right? But like those guys were all punk guys. So like the Neurotic Outsiders was like the most bizarre project, because it was meant for Billy Idol and Steve Stevens, and they got busy doing their thing, and they're like, well, who are we going to get? So they got the guitars from the Sex Pistols, and they got the singer from, and there was like a hardcore punk album. It was awesome. And it was, so it's just cool, right? When you get bands that, kind of have friends in the scene and are together and do their thing, and, they're not worried about things happening on either side of the spectrum. They just play because they want to, and they don't care about press and media and stuff like that. They just made an album because they wanted to make an album. They wanted to get together and do that. And like, and that's, that's how like Queens of the Stone Age started, right? He bumped into Nick Oliveri and was like, I need a bassist. And he's like, well, I got nothing going on. And there they go, right?
Yeah, but I think it was also because he did the Desert Sessions,
The
and
Desert
released
Sessions, right?
a few albums of that, and then it sort of just coagulated, and it's like, I think we've got a band here now. It's not just noodling around. Like, we've got a good band going on now, and obviously they're in the stratosphere now. So.
And that's kind of the crazy thing, right? Because like the Desert Sessions was just kind of an open door of whoever wanted to come in and jam, right? There was no rhyme or reason. It was just, someone showed up in the studio with a bass and said, all right, I want to play. And it was, I know the guy from Tool played on some of the stuff, and there was just different bands that were around at the time that were just kind of like hanging out, and that was kind of their thing, which was super cool, right? Because to have an all-star jam session like that is hard to find nowadays, right?
Yeah. And we can almost go full circle here too, in terms of, how have the Swedish bands stayed around and stayed interesting and been so influential over so long. And I had the theory of that they're driven more by the creativity than the fame.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think we can say the same for Josh Homme. To some extent, Dave Grohl, but it's become a little stagnant, to be honest.
Yeah.
Foo Fighters were.
And the thing with Dave Grohl is, right, like, I don't knock the guy, right, but like, he was kind of one of those people that kind of put themselves out there, right? He didn't do anything different than any of the other drummers of that era, right? Like Matt Sorum was a session drummer, right? He played with Guns N' Roses. He played with The Cult. He played with Billy Idol. He played with like all these other bands, right? He just kind of sessioned himself to doing what he was doing, right? He just had the namesake of being a part of the ideology that he used Guns N' Roses as his fame, right? But like, he had been in several other bands and then played in jam sessions and has done stuff with just about everybody, right? Where I think like Dave Grohl was just kind of used the Nirvana fame to be like, hey, I'm a drummer, but I'm also a guitarist. I can kind of sing, and stuff like that, right? So it's like, when you look at everything that's going on, right, and everything that's happening, right, and you look at the way that things are in the grand scheme of everything that's been going on, right? Dave Grohl is just kind of one of those guys that just falls in, right? I don't know if anybody's beating down his door. He's just kind of there, right? He just seems to show up.
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of cult of personality around Grohl too. I mean, I don't want to knock his songwriting because obviously he writes really catchy
Yeah, he's
songs, and
talented, right?
he knows how to make a guitar roar too, and stuff, right? But I think it's a little bit also that he's put himself out there and has been genuine and open and honest, and is
Yeah.
was trying to at least be a little bit of like, I'm like you guys, and I appreciate you fans, and I want to connect with you fans, and it was like the polar opposite of Maynard of Tool, right? It's like, oh, fans, go away from me. You're just there to listen to my music.
Yeah, and the
but
thing, like
but
and the thing, like we always argue Tool, right, back and forth, right? Like I like their music, but the thing with Tool is that like they've always been that way, right? They've always been kind of the shadow band, right?
yeah,
They've always been out of the mainstream, but it's the mainstream seems to follow them, right? It's weird that like you look at it from the standpoint of a band that plays together, but doesn't necessarily need to, right? Like Tool doesn't need to do anything, right? They can kind of do what they want to do. And I think it's just one of those in the middle of like everything that just happens with them is that they just kind of seem to do their own thing, and them being salty kind of just makes them the appeal to them, right? Like they're kind of like the cool version of Metallica, right? In that term, right? They're kind of they do their own thing. They come when they want, they go when they want, they play when they want, they tour when they want. I mean, it took them a decade to put out an album from one album to the other one, right? Nobody said anything. If that was any other band in the world, they'd be like, "Why the hell do you wait so long to put out an album? Put something out, right?" With them, nobody cared. They just did their thing and they said, "We'll put an album out when we're ready. We'll tour when we're ready. Leave us alone and don't bother us. And we'll when we're ready, you'll know." So I mean, I
so
give them credit for that, and I know you don't like them, and I know you think
yeah,
their attitudes are piss poor, but in terms of everything, they kind of do march to their own beat, right? They are kind of anti-establishment of the music industry.
yeah. And when did they release the Sobers? Like when they got huge with the song Sober, right? That was
Yeah, that was
93,
mid
94.
'90s. Yeah, that was.
So again, this is another band that's been driven by creativity, and they're still around and have a huge fan base.
Yeah, and like I
Are we
said,
starting to see a pattern here?
yeah, and it's just it's like we said before though. Good music is always going to take precedent over any band, right? Bands that can keep putting hit after hit, year after year, song after song. That's what really, like I said before, it pisses me off about Metallica, right? Because they ride the coattails of their first three albums. They haven't done anything musically great since 1990, right? I mean, they ride the coattails of those three albums, and nobody cares about Death Magnetic and the Load albums. Nobody's going to the concerts to hear any songs off of any of those albums, right? They go for the first three albums, right? They want the Master of Puppets, they want the Ride the Lightnings, they want the Some of Injustice for All, right? But those are what they're looking at, right? They're not looking to say, oh, play me an album off of Saint Anger, right? But no one's saying that. So they're very unique that like they've managed to make it all this time, but because they coattailed off of what they did, which is again why I think Megadeth is become kind of like the band that Metallica wanted to be like, right? Where like Dave Mustaine seems to keep writing hit after hit, putting out good album after good album, and getting musicians that are very capable to play his style of music. He's always surrounded himself with, I mean, everybody who's anybody in the music business has played in Megadeth, right? Like at some point, they've always been there. But he's always managed to find people that make him sound better, which is very odd because most people can't do that, right? Alice Cooper's another one, right? How many musicians have played with Alice Cooper? Everybody he finds makes him sound better and makes him perform better. He's like an anomaly in the business, right? It's amazing that like these guys can do that, right? It's so bizarre that like these guys find musicians to make them better, where it seems like Metallica was just kind of like, we'll put out what we want to put out, and and like I said, they tour off of the first three albums.
Yeah.
They and that's what upsets me about them, right? And it's like, they have the capability to write good songs and make good music. They just opt not to.
Yeah. No, I am agreeing 100% with everything you're saying there. The added thing about Megadeth is that it's to their detriment that Mustaine is such a douche, right?
That's right, right. But I
So
think he's matured well, right? Like I think
yeah,
he's
you
gotten
can't just
older and
defeat the
he's
music still,
realized,
right?
right? I think now he's come to terms with all that animosity and angst that he had, because all those albums that Megadeth put out in the 90s and early 2000s, those were basically middle fingers to Metallica, right? He was writing music just to spite them. He wasn't writing music because he wanted to write music. He was writing music to basically give the middle finger to those guys, which he did fairly well, right? Like,
Yeah,
when you look at those bad Metallica albums and you look at those Megadeth albums were way better than Metallica albums. So
yeah,
he's won. And I think that now, where he's in his age where like these guys are in their 60s now, right? And I think they look back and I think Mustaine now is the guy we always wanted him to be, right? Just to be that like kind of fun loving, let it go, don't be salty, don't be hateful, don't be like, you figured out your demons, you grew up, and now he's kind of like the fun loving guy that like we just wished for the last 40 years, that he would have been that guy. Right.
yeah. I'd have to dig back into it. I don't gravitate towards Mustaine, so I haven't really checked
Because
out
you
what
look
he's
at his
like now.
interviews now, right? He gives credit where credit's due. He says, I've made a ton of mistakes. I did things for all the wrong reasons, but now he's kind of open and candid about it, right? And he's like, listen, I know I was a jerk, right? I know I was an asshole. I know I was all those things, but I've grown up and now I'm kind of just content with what I've done. And my catalog speaks for itself. And he says that, right? He's like, look at my albums throughout of all the people that he's been with and played with. Now he's satisfied, right? He's like, listen, I did those things earlier on because I was getting back at those guys, and he's open about it. And now he's kind of like the fun-loving grandpa that we all kind of wish he would have been for the past 40 years, right? And
Good
and so
for him.
now it's like he's come full circle, right? And I think a lot of these guys, right, have just grown up. They've kind of realized that being a douchebag and being an asshole and being like doesn't get you anywhere now, right? And especially because social media calls you out on it, right?
Yeah,
You can't,
absolutely, yeah.
back in the 90s and 2000s before social media, you do and say whatever you wanted, right? Because the only people that were going to pick it up were people doing interviews or people writing articles about it, right? But now you have all this social media stuff where people are backstage and they're pointing a camera at you and they're like, look at this guy, what a jerk he is, right? Like, how does he treat his staff like that? How can he yell at his text like that? How can he be? Well, now you're on social media and you see that. Now you have thousands of people calling you a jerk, right? Like, why do you treat your staff like that? Why are you mean to your staff, right? We're like, when you look at like Zach Wilde, right, and you see all his stuff, even throughout the course of history, always hugging his guitar techs, giving them high fives, shaking their hands, giving them hugs, right? He was never mean to those guys. He always appreciated their help. And that's kind of a cool dude, right? Like, and that's why I think people gravitate towards Zach Wilde. And that's, I think, why people gravitated towards Pantera, right? They always treated their staff with respect. They always were hands on. Everybody loved Diamond Vinny, right? They kind of just did their thing, but they were nice to people, right? They were just genuinely good dudes that you would be like, if I wasn't famous, I would hang out with them, right? Like I would sit at a bar and have a drink with Dime, right? Like he's just that kind of dude, right? Like that, where I think like there are musicians that are just known to be assholes for the way they treat people just with utter disrespect, but nobody was there to capture it. And now when social media comes in and somebody's standing behind the stage with their camera going and you're like, oh shit, now I got to start, you know what I mean? Like now you have to change your attitude. But those guys were that way for 20 years, right? Where when you look at like the cool guys of music, right? Like the down to earth people, they were the ones that were always fun loving, hugging their staffs, giving them props. I couldn't do this without them, right? My guitar techs, my band techs, my engineers, my soundboard guys, right? They always gave those guys mad props. And I think that like that just goes to the character of who they are. And we see that now, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'm going to not switch gears, but it made me think of Kelly Clarkson. No, just a story that she said that she got involved with doing a project with a Swedish guy a Swedish almost Max Martin guy, Luke something.
Okay.
But Dr. Luke, I think he was called, and he was an asshole. So she was like, "No, I'm gonna cancel this project and walk out of here because this is not right." And then she realized, but I am just the artist that sings the thing. I have an industry behind me. There's like hundreds of people that are making their living based on what I do. So if I walk out of this project now and don't get paid, there are hundreds of people that aren't going to get paid. So she swallowed her pride. She did the project, said never again, Dr. Luke, walked out, and that's it, right?
But you saw the bigger picture.
I think that's what the really good bands are and know too, is that, you know, yeah, we're the band that are paying, but we would not be where we are without the machinery. You know, if one cog fails, if the sound guy fucks up,
right,
you know, it's going to be terrible. And
yeah,
you know, like they're just a tip of the iceberg, really. At the end of the day, you know, like they need a machine to function properly, right? So,
and that's so true. And you know what I love, you know, and what I love too, not to interrupt, but like I love when bands and members are actually genuinely friends, right? They hang out together. They want to do things outside of touring together, right? Because how many bands just get into a room, make music, and then all 4 or 5 guys go their own separate ways. And then when it's time to make another album, they come back together, they make the album, and then they go their separate ways. Where like I love to see bands that like on their spare time actually hang out with each other and like want to make music together and like want to do things together. And you see them chilling out together, right? And you see them, you know, actually being friendly, like how Kiss was when they first started, right? They were always together. They interviewed together. They did shows together. They hung out together. Like that, I think, was the appeal to them because like they were actually 4 guys who were friends, right? They actually cared about each other. They weren't just 4 random dudes that the music industry said, well, you, and you are great musicians. You're going to go make an album together. And then they're kind of forced to make music where like those guys were just friends, right? Like they hung out together. They were like there, right? And it's just, I like that in bands where you just seem to have 4 people that actually care about each other and get along and actually make music. And if one of them decides to leave and go on to other projects, those guys are in support of them. They're not like, oh, look at this idiot that left us, right? Like what a huge mistake this dummy made, right? They're actually like, all right, you know what? Do your thing. We'll let you go. The door's always open if you want to come back. And that again brings me again to a band Seven Dust, right? Seven Dust was that way. They always hung out together. And when Clint left the band, they said, hey, go do your own thing. If you ever want to come back. And he did.
Yeah.
So
I get that feeling from Iron Maiden too, for example. I know that there was one blip there where Dickinson left and did his own thing for a while.
Right.
Left and then came back. So I guess there was that blip, but still after 50 years, it still looks like, you know, these are the best of buddies and we want to hang out together. We want to be cramped in our tiny little jumbo jet.
Sure. That our singer flies.
Or whatever. It's not a tour band anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I think that's another key of longevity too. To be able to keep being creative and staying together and stay interesting for a long time, because if you keep getting inspired by each other in a group, you know, then that works. And that, you know, go back to Melvins too, like they know that it's Dale and King Buzzo. Now they had Red Cross Steve McDonald on bass for quite some time, longer than most, I think. But so they seem to have found a group there. Maybe they're also getting really old and tired and don't want to look for band
That's true, right? They are up there, right? They're you know, all these bands, you know, we look at, like, when I think of the Melvins, I think of the late 80s, early 90s Melvins, right? Like, you know, that like
Beavis and Butthead Melvins.
They're in their mid 60s now, right? Like some of them are probably up to 70, right? They're not, you know, young bucks anymore, right? And it's just kind of like, you know, you look at it and it's like, you know, I remember the Melvins like in the good days, right? But now it's like, you know, they're up there, right? You know, even the guys we forementioned at all the bands like Napalm Death and, you know, Entombed and
those playing with Melvins,
right? So I mean, they're all up in age now, right? They could still play, but like, you know, it's it's getting to that point now where it's like, you almost are sad to say it, but you kind of want to see them before anything happens, where they either decide to call it quits or retire, or just decide they don't want to make music anymore. And it's like, it's kind of heartbreaking, because like all the bands we just mentioned are all in that same boat, right? They're all in that mid 50s to late 60s, 70s, where you're like, and these guys aren't, like I remember them when they were, in their prime, when I was 13 and 14, right? I'm 44 now. So those guys, are, 25, 30 years older than me, right? So some of them are 65, 66, 67, right? It's like,
yeah.
No,
it's funny, but one good thing, one good shift I think that happened, and maybe it's because of how good of a musician you need to be and how on point you need to be every night, that with the extreme metal folks, the hard drugs were not so much a thing. I mean, obviously with the Seattle folks, that was a little bit different. It was rampant in the Seattle scene. But for the most part, when you see these metal bands now, like Dayside or whatever, right? They can still hang. They still sound pretty good.
Yeah.
Look, they're not skeletons and shadows of themselves once they hit the age 50.
Little more wrinkles, little less hair, but still bring it, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm showing my age, but I remember a band called the Traveling Wilburys. If you remember them, it was Tom Petty,
right? Yeah,
and George Harrison and Roy Orbison and Bob Dylan,
right?
And looking at their ages, it's a bunch of old dudes getting together to be a band. Right now, that band was younger than I am, except for Roy Orbison, who was 2 years older than what I am now. So it's like, oh, fucking hell.
Right.
Like, I don't feel old. Like, it was so unfair of me to say that then.
Right.
Now, right? So I kind of have changed my mind a little bit about, because for the longest time I was like, no, I'm not going to go see Slayer because they're just going to be tired old men that stand there and it's going to be disappointing. But then I keep hearing that, nope, yes, they still bring it. They still bring it. Now I'm too late, perhaps. Maybe.
And it's kind of crazy, right? Because like, I know we went to see Mushroom Head, right? Yep. And those guys are probably 20 years older than I am, right? So they're probably now, I would say, probably maybe 10 years older than I am, right? So, they're probably mid 50s, late 50s, right? But the reiteration of the band now, they gotten some younger guys in, right? So like the two new singers are my age, right? They're not, Jeffrey Nothing's age, who's 61 years old, right? They're younger guys now filling in with the older guys. So it's a little bit different, right? And I think that's kind of like the things where like, the bands like Slipknot and the bands that wear these masks like Ghost and stuff like that, you can put a guy who's 30 years old and you wouldn't be able to know the difference. If Mick Thompson said, I'm not going to play tonight, I want somebody to go in as me and wear my mask, no one would know.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I think that like there might be some young, right? You don't know who's behind the mask.
That's true. Yeah. And, there's a lot of people that are playing with ghosts.
In all theory, right? And I think that's kind of like the next generation of Kiss, right? Because Kiss said, it's not the band, it's the legacy, right? So if you get four guys in their 30s that don the makeup and play the Kiss songs, right? And all these Kiss cover bands, how would you know the difference, right?
Yeah.
Tommy Thayer was 25 years younger than all those other guys. If we're people Tommy Thayer's age dressed as Kiss and started singing, you wouldn't know the difference. Yeah. Other than it's not Paul and Gene, but I mean, like, the characters are still there, right? So if they put on a good show, just like those guys did, and they're name recognition guys, you wouldn't probably mind so much.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. It's difficult to get singers that can sound like Gene and Paul, though. That would be different.
Sure, I get that, but they're out there, right?
I see your point.
So for example, right? I'm just using this as probably a horrible example, right? But like Skid Row and Sebastian Bach, they were huge Kiss fans, right? Mm-hmm. So if Sebastian Bach wore Paul Stanley's makeup and another famous bassist wore Gene Simmons' makeup, and you knew who they were, but they were singing Kiss songs and can probably do it just as good as anybody, you would still go and see that, right? You know it's not Kiss, but you are kind of like, it is kind of Kiss, right? So you could see that being kind of cool, right? That like it could happen, and you know the namesake behind the band, right? So it's like,
Yeah. Well, all the ladies would go, oh, if
right.
Sebastian Bach covered up his face,
Yeah.
that pretty face with makeup.
So, you know, right? But
Oh.
but I'm just saying, like, if you got an
Right,
artist like that, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be him, but
No,
if
no,
you had
but-
somebody
no,
with
no.
some kind of fame behind them, right, who could
Yeah.
sing the songs, you wouldn't be so mad, right? You could just say, hey, I saw, Kiss with Sebastian Bach, or like, whoever decided to play. I mean, could you imagine, like, if Michael Anthony decided to play Gene Simmons, right? You wouldn't care, right? It's Michael Anthony, right? He's a
Yeah.
great bass player in his own mind, right? He could do everything Gene can do. He could sing just, as well. It's not Gene, but it's like, okay, but it's kind of cool, right? That people are emulating them, right? Or you got one of these younger bands that decided they were going to play Kiss for Halloween, right? People would love that. They'd be like, this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you.
Right? So,
All right.
oh, and speaking of which, I know you mentioned the Melvins, right? So real quick before you go, there is a Chicago band that are in the same vein as the Melvins. They're called Pelican.
Okay.
Check them out. Check Pelican out.
Will do, for sure.
Becca, what's up?
There was a band that opened for Baroness. I'm hoping that they were local. They're called Gozu. They were a little
Okay.
bit more sludge, stoner rocky, but they were great. And I looked them up on Spotify after, and they sound pretty good. So
Yeah, Pelican is in that kind of same vein, but they are very, very good. There was like sludgy kind of hardcore bands, and then Pelican is kind of that band, right? So if you
I will
if you
look
get
them
the
up.
chance to check them out, let me know what you think.
for sure,
But on that note,
and they're local, so they might show up on a
that
bill
is true. They are. I don't know if they still play together anymore, but
Oh,
a
okay.
buddy of mine turned me on to them many, many years ago. I've seen them live a couple times, and they were awesome. And it's just kind of they reminded me a lot of the Melvins when they played. They kind of had that vibe, right? It was just that kind of it factor that they had.
And Pelican is a cool name. I'm
Pelican,
gonna
yeah.
remember that and look it up.
Awesome. Well, guys, we're going to wrap it up. We've been on a little bit over an hour now. But we want to thank you again for the love and support. If you guys don't follow Kelly, follow him. He's awesome. He's got a great live that he does on Sundays and whenever he feels like popping on. But thank you guys again for all the love and support. Everybody who was a part of the show tonight. We go live Thursdays between 7 and 7:30. We try to hit them unless there's something going on. We'll figure out another night. But we're always here and we're always kind of doing our thing. So with that being said, guys, thank you again for all the love and support. We couldn't do this without you. We appreciate it. So thank you so much. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks for
guys.
listening, Jordan. See you next time. Next week, same time.
Yep.